Good morning, all. You can get seated, we'll get started. I hope you all are enjoying the conference thus far. I think it's been a great few days. I'm Dick White. I'm the acting president and CEO of APTA, and it's a real pleasure to be able to welcome you to the APTA-COMTO Assembly. I've been a member of both the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, or COMTO, and of course of APTA. I've had the honor of hosting a previous COMTO national conference as a former general manager, and as most of you know, I'm also a former chair of APTA. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today to the Assembly. This will be a different kind of session from the kind we've done in the past. Today's Assembly focused on promises, the protections, and the provisions of public transportation for all. This event speaks to the values of both of our organizations and why we are partners on so many critical issues. I would like to introduce my COMTO counterpart who will moderate this session, my friend Miyoshi Moses, who is President and CEO of COMTO. She has a very extensive experience as a leader of nonprofit organizations. Prior to joining COMTO, Miyoshi was Vice President of Membership and Chief Operating Officer of Leadership Greater Washington, a nonprofit organization providing professional development for top leaders in the region. She has extensive experience with the board of directors, top industry executives, and membership groups. Early in her career, she worked at Ernst & Young's National Tax Department, where she was a resident expert in exempt organizations. She also worked for Booz Allen Hamilton as a management consultant, focusing on change management, strategic planning, and business process improvement. Miyoshi has led several large team efforts that help transform governmental agencies into high-functioning, efficient organizations. Miyoshi was one of the very first persons that I met with when I got my appointment as the acting president and CEO. Actually, the very first day I was back on the job, coming from a Friday selection by the board of directors to be the APTA acting president and CEO to Monday. And we thought it was so important that we actually started off a relationship that way. And I believe Miyoshi's story is that her first day on the job, when she started, it was with APTA as well. So I think it's a perfect marriage. Turn it over to you, Miyoshi.
Thanks, Dick. We are very excited to be here. And as Dick shared, COMTO and APTA have a very long and storied relationship. And so we're thrilled to continue this relationship through this COMTO-APTA Assembly. One thing I want to get a little housekeeping out the way. Please, everyone, please turn your phones on mute or vibrate. We want to be respectful of all of our speakers. We have a fabulous group here. A little bit about APTA and COMTO. We've collaborated on an assembly at both the APTA and COMTO conferences for several years now. Previously, we focused on the DBE program, but felt that there was an equally relevant issue that we think provides a more timely discussion for this particular conference. We're here to support Charlotte in its efforts to protect the rights of all people, especially stakeholders in public transportation, which is a cornerstone of the civil rights movement and core missions of both APTA and COMTO. We have a very dynamic panel today. Each in his or her own right has an impressive background in various aspects of civil rights. In fact, the diversity of this panel helps to tell a particular story of what assurances and protections the Civil Rights Act provides in public transportation, how some civil rights issues have changed but remain the same under the umbrella of protection, and last but not least, the sacred trust we put in those who provide the public transportation that ensures access and opportunity. We intend for this session to provoke thought and dialogue and hope that it inspires you with many questions at the end. We'll have each presenter present their particular perspective, and then we'll open it up for questions from you. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Leslie Prohl, here immediately to my left. Prior to joining the U.S. Department of Transportation, Leslie Prohl served as Director of Policy for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the nation's oldest civil rights legal organization. She coordinated and implemented strategy on federal civil rights legislation, supervised responses to federal agency actions involving civil rights, and helped to develop proposals to strengthen federal civil rights legislation, regulation guidance, and data collection. She has testified before Congress, written articles and opinion pieces for numerous national publications, and appeared on television and radio. She received the Congressional Black Caucus Chairs Award in 2003. Prior to working in Washington, D.C., Leslie was a civil rights lawyer in Birmingham, Alabama, for almost 10 years. She litigated dozens of federal civil rights cases, including class action suits and jury trials. Please welcome Leslie Prohl.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, everybody. On behalf of Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox, I want to thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I think it's a wonderful continuation of the partnership that DOT has with APTA and COMTO, so thank you very much. As someone who litigated civil rights cases in Alabama, I have to confess to you that I leapt at the chance to be on a panel on the day that celebrates the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. Today's the 62nd anniversary, on a panel to discuss buses and civil rights with a panelist named John Lewis. So I said yes without knowing anything more, but I'm very happy to be here today. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the historical nexus between civil rights and transportation. I think it's a result of the fact that I worked for so long for the oldest civil rights legal organization that I always like to look at things in terms of our history, because I think it's important to guide what we're doing today. And then I want to tell you some exciting things that we're doing at the department about civil rights and opportunity in transportation. So as I said, today's the 62nd anniversary of the Brown v. Board case, really the most celebrated ruling by the Supreme Court, which outlawed racial segregation in public education. And the fundamental connection between Brown and transportation, I think, is worth knowing. Although the ruling ended state-sponsored segregation in education, it was immediately applied to dismantle other forms of state-sponsored segregation, such as in transportation. And in fact, challenges to racial segregation in transportation were really part of the kind of key program areas as the early civil rights leaders attacked de jure segregation. Thurgood Marshall, who used to lead the Legal Defense Fund, used to talk about the education cases, the school cases, but he also used to talk about the transportation cases. And so I think that is very important to mention. So really, since Homer Plessy's challenge to segregated rail cars in the 1890s, transportation has been inexorably linked to the struggle for racial equality. Certainly the most famous of the transportation cases is undoubtedly the case relating to Rosa Parks. And it's interesting, if you think about the chronology, it was only 1 year after Brown was issued that Rosa Parks took her courageous move to refuse to get up on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, which ignited the Montgomery bus boycott, which in turn ignited the modern civil rights movement. And while the boycott continued, lawyers went into federal court to challenge the law on behalf of not Rosa Parks, but 4 other women who had done similar things. And this case was called Browder versus Gale. And the interesting thing about it from our perspective is that the Brown decision, which had just been issued, really provided the kind of lead case in terms of how the court would rule. And of course, the lawyers and the plaintiffs had challenged the Montgomery laws, which required racial segregation on the buses. And the court noted that it had rejected the doctrine of separate but equal in Brown and said that requiring segregation of the white and colored races on the motor buses also violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So there is a direct connection between Brown and transportation justice going way back. But this was not the only really important transportation case. There was another one that I really wanted to make sure you knew about, and that's called Boynton versus Virginia. And this case came in the early 1960s, and it involved a Howard Law student named Bruce Boynton, who was traveling home by Trailways bus to Alabama for Christmas. And he had stopped in Richmond, and he sought service in a whites-only restaurant in the terminal. He was arrested, and the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the court ruled that the prohibition on discrimination in interstate transportation services applied not only to the buses themselves, but to the facilities and services related thereto. So it was a very important, different new ruling regarding transportation. Interestingly, this is the case that led to the freedom rides that began in 1961, because the civil rights warriors, including John Lewis, were certain that southern states were not following the dictates, the ruling of the Boynton case. And so they embarked on their very famous Freedom Ride tour to ensure and to basically test whether they could eat and partake in the facilities with respect to the railway and bus systems. And we all know the history of that. They went through Rock Hill, North Carolina, then to Anniston, then to Montgomery, and then on to Jackson. So, here you've got a transportation case that really sparked the freedom rides. Even though we always consider the freedom rides as part of our transportation history, it was actually a transportation case that sparked them. Another interesting fact that I just have to share with you is that Bruce Boynton's mother was actually Amelia Boynton. And I don't know if that name means anything to you, but if you saw the movie Selma, and you remember the woman who lived in Selma who actually called Martin Luther King and his colleagues to come to Selma to help work on the voting rights struggle, that was his mother. And it turns out she ended up marching across Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday and getting attacked herself. And you may remember photos from the State of the Union a couple years ago where President Obama had invited her to come to the State of the Union, and she was over 100 years old. She was in a wheelchair. And she ended up walking across Edmund Pettus Bridge when the president went down to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And unfortunately, she passed away recently. But I just wanted to make sure you knew that connection between transportation and voting rights really kind of resided in one family from Selma. And I think that is a very interesting fact. And finally, the last thing I wanted to say about Boynton was Thurgood Marshall from the Legal Defense Fund had argued the Boynton case before the Supreme Court, and it was his last time that he appeared before the Supreme Court before going on to the bench himself and then ultimately the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of history in the Boynton case, and thank you for indulging me. So although racial segregation and discrimination in transportation was outlawed decades ago, it really requires our constant vigilance in ensuring equal opportunity among the transportation industry. And I wanted to spend the rest of my time talking to you about what Secretary Fox has called his Ladders of Opportunity initiative. And I really hope you know about this. Secretary Fox is a former Charlotte mayor. He actually selected Charlotte to be the first forum where he presented his Ladders of Initiative. We call it a TED Talk, just about what it's about and his vision going forward. So the Ladders of Opportunity Initiative seeks to use transportation to connect people and communities to opportunity of every kind. It's focused on providing and sustaining more economic opportunity for everyone. And as Secretary Fox says, transportation cannot just be viewed as focused on getting from point A to point B. It's really a means of promoting opportunity. He has tasked the department, including my office, to ensuring that all Americans can climb up the ladders of opportunity. And interestingly, he's even created a position called Chief Opportunities Officer that is held by Stephanie Jones, and it's the first ever such position to be created in the federal government. So he really is putting the staff and the resources behind this initiative. He's committed to making diversity, inclusion, and equal access something that every part of the department does. So under the Ladders Initiative, we've launched several groundbreaking programs which have really incentivized considerations of equity and opportunity in our grants. The Tiger Grant Program, the Ladder Step Program, and the Local Hire Program. And this strategy recognizes how key, as I'm sure you all know, transportation is to connecting people to good jobs. And you may remember the man from Detroit, James Robertson, who they call him, I went to Detroit on my first visit. I'm fairly new at the department, and I went to Detroit, and I came to learn that they call him the walking man up there. But this was a man who lived in the city of Detroit, but worked at a manufacturing company in a northern suburb that did not have bus service. And so he would ride the bus service out to the edge of the city and then walk the rest of the way. And he ended up for years walking 21 miles every day round trip. And so these are the types of things that we're trying to address through our Ladders of Opportunities initiatives and our grant programs. And wanted to mention that one of the things we did, we had a Ladders of Opportunity initiative where we funded Detroit to purchase 50 new buses. And when I was up there, I was able to see the new routes that they were able to install and the new service times. So it was really a kind of a wonderful testament to trying to address the problems of this one man that are really going on everywhere, as we know. So just a bit about my office. We enforce the applicable federal civil rights laws, including Title VI. We have stepped up our civil rights enforcement and compliance efforts. I have to tell you, at 7 this morning, I had a wonderful meeting with your representatives on the Title VI committee, and there is just a lot of really strategic, creative thinking going on by this organization, and I really want us to be a part of it. Just a couple of highlights of what we're trying to do. We want to be used as a guide and a resource, a place where you can get technical assistance. I mean, we have the hammer of Title VI, but we also view it as a carrot, as a key to a really strategic dialogue about these issues. We would rather not wait until somebody files a Title VI complaint. We would like considerations of opportunity and equity to be done at the front end of the decision making, and that the voices of the communities who are impacted by the decisions are heard and they're at the table. And we are not kind of prejudging the process. We don't know the answers ahead of time, but we feel that if the right people are there, the decision is going to produce a more democratic outcome and probably a better outcome. And one of the things that we want to help you with is to engage the community more meaningfully. We know that that is a challenge many times and in many places, and we want to strategize with you, come up with some kind of new approaches about going to the community instead of having the community come to us at a fixed time and date. And we're really researching that, and we want to work with you on that. So in concluding, let me just say that, I'm very excited to be here in Charlotte. This is something that the Secretary feels very strongly about. He talked in his comments, and I can make sure you all know where to see the video of his remarks about how his own kind of personal history was deeply affected by transportation decisions from long ago, in that he lived in a community in Charlotte, and I-77 and then I-85 came right through his community and basically cut it off forevermore in a way that really depleted its economic viability and kind of every other social structure. So it's very personal to him. It's something that he's committed to working on throughout the rest of his tenure, and we really want to be part of the solution with you. So please use this as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for that fantastic history lesson and the nexus between transportation and the civil rights movement. And I was really excited to hear about what the department is doing currently through the Secretary's office, through your office, department-wide, some of the policies and programs that you have in place. So that was very, very informative. I hope that you all found it as intriguing as I did. Next, we have Connie Vetter. To her right, attorney Connie Vetter is proud to offer legal services to North Carolina's diverse community, including gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender individuals and couples, as well as straight individuals and couples. Her law practice is dedicated to personalized legal representation and exceptional client service. Attorney Vetter operates a client-focused practice where the law is explained in understandable language and clients' questions are answered so each client can be fully involved in his or her important legal matter and make informed decisions. Connie was recently honored with the Julius L. Chambers Diversity Champion Award of the Mecklenburg County Bar Association. Welcome, Connie Vetter.
Well, good morning. Shortly after HB 2 passed, I received a phone call in my office, and I'm sorry, I get emotional about it still. It was a call from a father of a 10-year-old daughter, and he was calling to say, what am I supposed to do? What is my daughter supposed to do at school? His daughter was born, the doctor said and put on the birth certificate, the sex identifier is male. The little girl came to her parents at some point and said, I'm a girl. And the parents worked with medical professionals and determined that that is who, in fact, the child's gender identity is. Under HB 2, this little girl is now required to use the boys' bathroom at school. Her father and mother are terrified for her safety, as I suspect she is as well. So I'm going to talk to you about HB 2. And if this makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but not really. This is the fast forward from what Leslie was talking about to 2016. And Julius Chambers, whom Yoshi mentioned, was behind the Swan versus Board of Education school desegregation busing case out of Charlotte. And so we have a history here. This all came about after Charlotte passed an ordinance expanding its non-discrimination policy to include a number of different category statuses: marital status, familial status, gender identity, and gender expression. It added sex and sexual orientation as well to the list of protected categories in public accommodations. This happened after a friend of mine, a man named Scott Bishop, who he and I have served on a number of committees together and worked with City Council and County Commission on a number of issues, went to a City Council member and started talking about expanding this ordinance to recognize the world that we actually live in. And 2 years ago, in 2015, the ordinance did not pass after some members of City Council sought to remove transgender or gender identity and gender expression from the proposed ordinance. This past year in February, it did pass with the inclusion of those terms, including all the other ones that I mentioned. And I bring this up because there's been a lot of misinformation. Jennifer Roberts, who is our current mayor, was supportive, but this didn't come from her. It actually came from a community member, my friend Scott Bishop. The city attorney was consulted about whether Charlotte had the authority to expand its own non-discrimination ordinance, and a number of cities in North Carolina have non-discrimination ordinances and have expanded them at various times, and our city attorney said, yes, we have the authority as a city to do so. As you all know, then in a session lasting fewer than 12 hours, our General Assembly passed HB 2, House Bill 2, and our Governor, Pat McCrory, signed it that same day. House Bill 2 has a number of parts, and I want to really break it down because again, I don't know what you all's education level is on this, so certainly the news has covered it primarily as a bathroom bill. It does a lot more than that. So the first part, the one that gets the most information, is saying that schools and governmental agencies, entities, parks, public restrooms are required to have bathrooms designated by sex, and that they are required to make sure that only people of that sex that's on their birth certificate use that bathroom. The other parts go into saying that cities and counties are not allowed to set their own minimum wage standards and their own child labor laws. It also says that cities and counties and the state non-discrimination in employment statute does not cover gender identity, and that there is no longer a private right of action. In other words, if you have been discriminated or feel you've been discriminated in your employment, you cannot take a case into state court. You can still go into federal court, but that has its own separate line of work. You can no longer take it into state court. So when our governor said that HB 2 didn't take away any rights, this was something that had been in law since at least 1977, and it absolutely took that out of the law. So there's no private right of action, there's no lawsuit now. And in fact, the people who had lawsuits, theirs instantly went away. That's huge. And then the other big thing that it did was change the state's non-discrimination ordinance. It removed age from the the public accommodations ordinance law, and said that there is no gender identity covered by the state's public accommodations law, and there is no right to sue in court if you have been discriminated against or feel you've been discriminated against in a public accommodation. Public accommodations are things, you probably know this, public entities, business in serving the public, hotels, taxis, things like that. So there have been a lot of lawsuits, again, covered well in the media. The lawsuits all only have to do with the portion of HB 2 having to do with bathrooms, and the arguments focus around Title VII and Title IX. There are no lawsuits covering the loss of the private right to sue in state court for a public accommodations violation or an employment violation, and none of the wage and hour or child labor laws. Pat McCrory, a few days later, tried to soften it a little bit by issuing an executive order, which did basically nothing. He added gender identity and sexual orientation into the non-discrimination portion for state employees, but it's one of those things that once you parse it apart, it actually only covers the state employees that are covered by the executive order, which are the executive branch. It doesn't cover teachers, it doesn't cover judicial branch. It is a small thing that he did with that. U.S. Department of Justice responded by requesting the General Assembly and Pat McCrory to make a statement that they would not enforce HB 2. They sent that on Thursday, May 4th. On Monday, their response was, both from the General Assembly and from our governor, was to go to court, federal court, and ask for a declaratory judgment, basically saying that Title IX and Title VII do not include in the definition of sex any language about gender identity. And that is there's a line of cases over the years that do include the term of gender identity or expression in the term sex. And in fact, there's just been, after all of this started, a case out of the Fourth Circuit where a school district had told a young transgender man that he had to use the girls' bathroom at school. And the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, in which North Carolina sits, said no, Title IX requires that a student be allowed to use the bathroom that matches their gender identity. So that is part of that. So we've got the Purdue and the lawsuits, including yesterday, the ACLU, which had previously filed a lawsuit, is now asking for an injunction on HB2 that it will not be implemented. And then we had another protest at Raleigh last night with some people arrested. The calls that I get and the conversations that I have with my friends who believe that they have suffered employment discrimination, who are transgender and say, the law says that I am required to change my birth certificate in order to go into the bathroom that is the bathroom that I'm supposed to be using. North Carolina law, like many states, requires that before you can change the sex identifier on your birth certificate, you have to have had surgery, sex reassignment surgery. Well, sex reassignment surgery is not an option for some people, for medical reasons, for financial reasons, for whatever other reason. And so we find people who are stuck, or they live in a state that does not allow them to make any kind of change to their original birth certificate. And so we have these people stuck. I'm hearing stories of people being harassed, people who may not be transgender but are not traditionally feminine or traditionally masculine, or don't fit somebody's idea of how they're supposed to look in order to use that bathroom. I heard a story about a woman. The HB2 says that you cannot take children of the opposite sex into the bathroom with you if you're a parent if they're over age 7. So there's a story about the woman who had 2 little children and a 10-year-old boy. And one of the little ones had to go to the bathroom. And this mother was not about to leave her little 10-year-old standing out in the hallway while she takes the 2 little ones in there. If you all have kids, when you take 2 little ones in, it's not a 2-minute, you're going to be in there for a minute or 2. She took the 10-year-old in, did what parents do, kind of stood him in the corner, went into the stall with the little ones, and some other woman in the bathroom complained, called security, and security ended up escorting this woman and her little children and her son out of the bathroom. HB2 affects real people's lives, not only in the bathroom issue, but also in the public accommodations, the minimum wage, child labor, and not being able to sue in state court when you feel you've been discriminated against in your employment.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you for really helping us understand the true impact and scope of this bill. As you said, the media coverage has been limited, but you providing a broader explanation has been really helpful. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. All right, and finally, our last presenter, last but not least, is John Lewis. I'm sure all of you know him by now, if you hadn't before now. John was named head of the Charlotte Area Transit System in July of 2015. He previously held the top positions at the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority, more commonly known as LINCS, and the Greater Richmond Transit Commission in Richmond, Virginia. He also serves on several APTA committees. John began his transportation career in the Maryland Department of Transportation before he selected transit as his path of interest. He transitioned to the Maryland Transit Administration in 2000 and quickly made his mark as director of bus and rail operations. He has been on the move since that time and serves as our transit host for this conference. Thank you, John. Welcome.
Thank you, Miyoshi, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. And I particularly really enjoyed Leslie's historical rendition of the connection between transportation and the civil rights movement, and particularly public transit and the civil rights movement. And, you know, Connie, I got here in September, and HB2, I think, the Charlotte legislation was passed either in late September or early October. And so I've lived that literally on my front step. And this is an issue that's evolving, and thank you for your role and leadership in this. I was thinking as I was going to present today, as a transit operator, we tend to focus on what happens at the ground level. But I think after hearing the discussion today, I reflected back to my path to where I am today, and how fortunate I've been in certain opportunities and decisions that have led me to Charlotte. But thinking back to, I remembered my living with my grandmother, or being, my grandmother was a caretaker for us as both my parents worked, and my grandmother didn't have a license. After my grandfather passed, she sold his car, didn't own a car. And I used to despise, being dragged around Baltimore City as my grandmother went about her daily business, daily activities, work, play, religion, going to church, everything else on MTA vehicles. She knew those bus routes better than anything. It provided her access to opportunity. Now, as a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, whatever, being dragged around the city with, I couldn't remember, why don't you have a car like mom and dad and make this easier? But I think those foundations were set then. The bus provided my grandmother with access to everything that the city had to offer. She did her grocery shopping. She went to work. She visited friends. She was able to come and watch my sisters and brothers and I, and did not stop. It was not an impediment. It was not a challenge. It was the way of life for her. Fast forward, after going away to school and coming back to the Maryland area to work, my first job out of college was working for United States Senator Barbara Mikulski. Her career got started on a very similar path to the mayor, now Secretary Anthony Fox, fighting a highway that was being built in Baltimore City that divided two historically African-American communities. And the result of that investment in I-70, which stopped, and in Baltimore you look at it, and that's the highway to nowhere because it stopped, but it still divided two communities. And her passion about how we plan, appropriate, and build transportation infrastructure launched her career, and I saw that passion that she had in that. At that time, I never knew I would end up in a public transit agency, but I look at those building blocks that resulted in my decisions. And then finally, after I got into public transit, I had the opportunity, as you mentioned, Mayoshi, to lead the transit agency in Richmond, Virginia. I also had the opportunity to work with an unbelievable individual, a pioneer in public transit, Eldridge Coles. Eldridge, as a result of, I believe, the case that you mentioned, Leslie, was one of the first 5 African-American bus operators to integrate the Greater Richmond Transit, which was Virginia Transit provider agency at that time. Eldridge, through a 45-year career, held every position from bus operator to CEO of the agency. But the opportunity to learn at Eldridge's feet, I think, really helped me move forward in my career. Now, fast forward to the challenges that we have. I think as public transit providers, as we are working diligently throughout the country to provide mobility options to a widest variety of citizens that we serve. We even coined terms, choice riders, and we want to attract choice riders. We want public transit to be a mode of choice rather than a mode of last resort, because we want to build systems that people want to take. But at the crux of that, we have to remember that we are also need to provide transit services and mobility options to those that don't have other options. And I believe the transit-dependent community, that is what drives us. That is what our primary mission is. And I think that grows out of the civil rights movement. The actions that Rosa Parks took at the end of a long day of working, she was going to and from work by bus. And out of that grew the civil rights movement. And so the connection between public transit and civil rights, I think, is one that will continue. We will be in lockstep moving forward, no matter what the issue is. I think we are facing a different type of issue as transit providers now that is one that we have to be creative in how we address. I think we're seeing, and as we've talked in other sessions, we're seeing a rebirth and a regeneration of our urban areas, and that's a good thing. You look outside these windows of the convention center, you can't look at a point on a compass without seeing a crane. Charlotte is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, and that's fantastic news for cities. And no matter what city you are in or reside in or have the opportunity to visit, I think you'll see similar things throughout the country. But I think the flip side of that great story and that very shiny coin is a little bit of tarnish in that. As the cost of living in Charlotte has grown exponentially over the last 10 years, and that core transit dependent where 10, 15 years ago, it was very easy to provide services for because they resided in our urban areas, are now, because of those changes, are having to move further and further out, away from our urban core. And our systems aren't designed necessarily to meet that. And so we've had, and I've heard Secretary Fox talk about these transportation deserts, where people have had to move further and further out to find affordable housing. But they're now, once they found those areas of affordable housing, those are not necessarily areas that are served at all by public transit, or if they are served very infrequently. And so I think that is the challenge, the next challenge. And I think what grew out of the civil rights was not just an accessibility or a legal, but it was an economic movement. And as we look at our core business, providing access to opportunity is at its core an economic question. And so many of our customers are in areas that we're unable to serve. That is, I think, the next challenge that public transit and transportation officials need to address. And we've heard a wide variety of ideas of getting to that point, and I think we ultimately will. But I think as we think back to the crux of that issue, what we do is provide access to opportunity, and that is in of itself a civil right, I believe. And that is what I think motivates so many of us who are in public transit to do what we do on a daily basis.
Well, John, thank you very much for sharing your personal story about what brought you to transportation, to transit, and to help you. It sounds like it's help informing your decisions and identification of what the challenges are today. So thank you for that. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, so I can tell you my brain is huge right now. I've heard a lot of great information. I have tons of questions, but I want to open it up to all of you. Does anybody have any questions for our distinguished panel here? None? Okay, well then I have a ton. Oh, go ahead, Freddie. There's a microphone there if you want to step to the microphone.
Good morning, Freddie Fuller with CH2M. Connie, in your remarks, I heard you mention age, but I wasn't clear. Did you say that age had been removed from being covered by the discrimination laws?
It was removed from the public accommodation part of the statute.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Doran. All right.
Get over to the mic here. Doran Barnes, APTA Vice Chair and Executive Director of Foothill Transit. Thank you for the great presentation. I think the scope of the panel is so important to the work that we're doing. Connie, I really appreciate your educating us about HB2, and I've tried to study it a little bit, but it's a lot to try to figure out. I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit from a broader national industry perspective in terms of what we're doing, what's happening across the country. What are the lessons we can learn from the North Carolina experience, or the things that we can watch for?
Well, that's a good question, for which I don't have clearly a ready answer.
No, worries. It's,
So let me see if I can get a little bit more information from you, because my background, I mean, I'm an attorney, so I don't have any public transportation background, and that kind of sounds like that's what you're asking.
Well, I don't think so much from a public transportation standpoint, but more from a national dialogue standpoint. You've had a very specific experience here in North Carolina. I think it informs and educates dialogues that are happening or not happening across the country. And as an industry, we're very much leaning into the issues of diversity and inclusion, and I think some new and some interesting ways. If there's a silver lining in this, it's that it's helped elevate the discussion that we're having. But as we continue with that, are there things that we should be thinking about as we work across the nation on issues of diversity, inclusion, civil rights, and perhaps any of the panelists might be able to comment on that. I think it's a discussion that we absolutely have to have, and the discussion plays differently in different parts of the country, but we've got to be engaged in that, and we've got to be thinking about, okay, North Carolina is the tip of the spear today, but what happens next, and how do we engage in that, and how do we think about this stuff, and where do we go? And again, I would open up to any of the panelists. And it's just not just transportation, but it's really from a broader standpoint.
So one piece of it is, so this started in Charlotte, and now, I heard this discussed on 3 different radio shows on NPR yesterday. There are lawsuits being filed in other parts of the country, and about gender identity. And so part of it is, I think, people that work in with diversity and inclusion, what does that really mean? And moving it forward, and how broad is our definition of humanity, of compassion, of understanding. And in this situation, I think that the movement has gotten out a little bit, or maybe even a long way ahead of the public. What is gender identity? What is gender expression? And I find out from myself in conversations that I have with my friends, this is an area of law where I work in, and so for me it's, I live and breathe this. And then I have conversations, including with my own partner, about, well, what does that mean? And so I think that it's the next step forward about what do we mean by diversity? What do we really mean about inclusion? How far are we willing to go? How far out of our comfort zone are we willing to go? And sitting here, my position is that the baseline is we are human beings, we are people, and we treat people, it's golden rule, you treat people how you want to be treated, it's humanity and it's compassion. And for me, with that as my definition, it makes it much easier for me to then embrace diversity and embrace inclusion, because we have many more commonality than we have differences.
It's a really powerful definition. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, as a representative of the federal government, I don't want to say too much because this is an ongoing litigation, but I will say 2 things. And the first is what happened here, and even the conversation that we're having here today, shows you that civil rights is not static, that it continues to evolve in ways that some of us, might not have imagined decades ago, and, will so in the future. And I really appreciate your statement about wanting to stay on top of it and kind of know what you need to know. But I will also say that, it really comes down to an interpretation here of the federal civil rights statutes, and kind of, whether gender identity and sexual orientation, fall within the ban on sex discrimination. And I think the federal government through litigation and through policy has indicated, its position that yes, it does. And so, we're gonna see what this court ruling is gonna do. But I imagine there will be more about this. But I really appreciate the question, because I think it's important to acknowledge.
The dialogue's got to continue, and we've got to continue to lean in. And we're talking about North Carolina today, but we'll be talking about something else, and maybe North Carolina as well as we go forward. So appreciate that very much.
If I can also, and I wanted to, as the host of the conference, you know, when this happened and being here in Charlotte and in the midst of it, I think the level of discussion has changed so fast. At first, it was the reaction was we should not come to Charlotte, and Charlotte lost a number of major events and conferences, and we're slated to host the NBA All-Star Game next spring, and there's still conversation going on about that. Then it evolved to artists who said, no, we're going to come, we want to engage in this discussion, and we're going to use our profits that are made there to support the ongoing debate. I think, and there was lively discussion within the APTA community about this and whether or not the conference should come. I think that discussion lasted about 5 minutes, and I wanted to not only acknowledge that, but thank APTA for coming and supporting Charlotte in the way that it has to continue to have the conference here. And I think it was an opportunity to engage in discussion, to understand what was going on here in Charlotte, and then made a very quick decision that the APTA is coming to support Charlotte. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank the leadership of my colleagues at APTA for doing that.
And I'll sit down here in a second, but John, thanks for that arc. And I think serving on the executive committee, it was more than 5 minutes. It was about 10 or 15, and you were part of that whole thing.
Yeah.
But it was really, really intense. And I think that whole arc and that whole discussion of what's the right thing to do just shows the complexity of these issues that we're struggling with. So thanks for engaging with us in that. I agree. I think we made a good decision to be here, and at the same time want to respect our colleagues who, you know, made an individual decision not to be here. Again, these are complex issues. So thank you.
Thanks, Doran. And in that vein, just a question to the leaders in transportation. As you're having these dialogues, are you seeing the potential impact specifically affecting areas in which you work? This is posed to you, John, and you, Leslie, in particular.
Well, I think this is an ongoing issue. I mean, Charlotte was at the forefront of this, and I think this was, as I understand, because I just got here in September, this was a culmination of a couple of years of discussion at the city council level. And this council made a decision to pass this ordinance. Personally, I think it was the right decision. Charlotte has always been in many different arenas. Transportation, government sector has been at the forefront and on the cutting edge of many things, and it did not surprise me that we would be leading in this area. So because it's so new, I don't know that we've seen the total outcome of this. We haven't changed any of our activities at the city level nor at CATS. We were always thought of ourselves as inclusive, and we have not, I won't say we haven't seen, it is not an issue, or we have not seen the ripple effect of this yet, but I think we're still learning as we're going along on this.
Sure. You know, I think this isn't an issue that was foreign to us. I think it has come up in different situations in recent years through different transportation modes. I think that it is our job, and particularly the job of my office, to stay current on, you know, how the courts are interpreting federal civil rights statutes, and, you know, we have to know the latest, but importantly for, you know, purposes of relating and talking with you all, it's we provide guidance to our recipients of federal funding about how to adhere to civil rights laws. So, you know, it's really important that we kind of, you know, move through this together, and that everybody who's receiving federal funding is, you know, using that money in a way that complies with their civil rights obligations. So there is a real kind of business need here in terms of people staying kind of current with what the courts decide and looking to us for guidance on that.
First of all, I just want to say, Leslie, I really did enjoy the history lesson you gave there. And actually, I am really excited to go home and try to flaunt my knowledge in front of my husband that's an attorney about law cases. So I might need your notes to make that successful. My question is actually to both Leslie and Connie. There are some examples out there where we are accommodating gender identity successfully in living arrangements and public arrangements on colleges and university campuses. My daughter lives in a dorm where gender identity is accommodated in the dorm. So how are we using those as examples to be successful in rolling that out into the broader society while addressing real issues that people have that laws may compromise? I mean, either real or perceived safety issues. Some crazy person is going to find that loophole in the law to exercise their interests. At the same time, we need to be able to accommodate that mother with the children, because you're right, I'm not leaving my 10-year-old standing outside, while I'm taking care of the other younger ones. So how can we use, or how are we using some of those examples of where we are accommodating people's needs and rolling that to a broader application?
Well, let me take a kind of a first response, and then I'll turn it over to Connie. I mean, I think one of the helpful things that the federal government does and can do more of in providing guidance to how to interpret this development in certain situations. You maybe heard about the letter to the school districts that was sent out. And there are other situations in the employment context that not only say what the law is, but give instruction and examples and best practices kind of about how to follow it. And I think those are very helpful. They bring kind of the real life, what do I do with this now? How do I make this apply to my situation? I think that is very helpful. They usually come in, the form of written documents. That's not to say that if you don't pick up the phone and have a somewhat different situation that someone, wouldn't want to help you walk through something. So I think that's what, the agencies have civil rights offices. That's a role that I see us playing. I see, other offices within other agencies playing the same thing. But as a civil rights lawyer, I think that's very, very helpful because, people want to comply with the law. They may just not know how precisely to do it.
I've got a couple of different things. HB 2, the bathroom provisions part of it, were sought to be a solution for a problem that didn't exist. We have been using the bathrooms, all of us, next to people who are transgender and never known it, and it's never been a problem. There are no issues, there are no cases of someone who is transgender harming someone else in a bathroom. If the issue is predators in bathrooms, then you pass laws that deal with predators in bathrooms, not a blanket statement that says because of the fact that somebody is transgender, they should somehow be restricted in something that is just a part of our daily lives, our bathroom, going to the bathroom. So that's one part of it. And then also just passing, if it's about predators, then deal with the predators. There was something else I was going to say. Let me see if I can get it. Sorry. Oh, honey. I'm well aware. All age, yeah. This is, I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, we'll come back to you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Adelie LeGrand. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for the New Orleans RTA. So this is a great conversation, great dialogue, and a lot of discussion about the law. You change laws and they get implemented, but it's still about the people, right? How people respond to the law and how regular citizens act regardless of what the law is, right? So we all know about the Trayvon Martin case, and there was a stand your ground law, so it was legal, but why should people behave in that manner, right? Why are we afraid of people who may not look like us? Those of us in transit, we all know if you try to extend a transit line, people say, oh, we don't want it to come to this neighborhood because we don't want those people there. The conversation that we're having here is really great, but it's really focused on the legal side. And even if the law changes, it's about the citizens of this country working together and accepting and embracing the differences. And I'd like to hear if you have any ideas or strategies or campaigns that are going to follow with, with the law here in North Carolina, from, on a more federal level, to get the word out to help people figure out, one, how to understand the differences, what the differences are, and what we need to move forward. I'd like to hear some discussion on that.
That's a great point. I will start off. I think that the focus on meaningful community engagement and citizen participation, public participation around all of these issues is very important. I mean, there's only so much that a law can do. There's only so much that a civil rights enforcement agency can do. And I think the more people engage around these issues on the ground, you talk about the what happens if there's a decision to not bring transportation into an area for certain reasons. What we would like to see is a kind of robust community engagement program in every area around the country that is ongoing, that is, knows how to weigh in, knows how to make its influence exercised around transportation decisions, because that is really giving true meaning to Title VI and environmental justice principles, because it's really up to communities, in the end, to let us know what's going on. What we're trying to do also is engage transportation decision makers at the local level early on, as I said, about making sure that just as they think about design and cost and all the other things that go into the planning process, that they're also considering the impact on all the communities affected by the decision, and that they get that input early on. And so, it's kind of an eyes and ears on the ground, and we want to step that up. We're really talking, thinking, and trying to strategize about how to ensure that there's more robust community engagement around all these issues, that people get why it's important. They're not transportation advocates necessarily all the time. They have a day job, but they know that what's vital to their community is this decision that's being made, in the next 6 months. And so how are we going to weigh in on it? And I think that's something that is going to be hopefully helpful to local transportation officials who, should and want to hear from the community, but sometimes it's just really hard to execute that. And so I think bringing kind of those two audiences together for very constructive, ongoing relationships is something that we really like to see.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Darryl Frierson. I'm with the host agency, CATS. I want to welcome you on behalf of our CEO. I welcome you to our fine city. Connie, as you know, the citizens of Charlotte, we see the news every day, and obviously HB2, if it's not the first story, it's the second story. Very rarely is it the third story. And the citizens of our community, I do believe, are frightened frightened, but I believe that's a lot out of ignorance. As you said, all you hear is the bathroom part of HB2. And so I have daughters, I have a wife, so obviously I share concerns as well, but I think it's about educating. And once you start educating people and letting them know, you covered it very well today, and I think a session I was in yesterday also explaining what HB2 is. So my question is, do you know of the plan that maybe there is to educate our community more on what HB2 really is all about?
Sure, there are a number of organizations that are happy to come and talk. They may have websites, I'm not sure. In Charlotte, we have the Freedom Center for Social Justice, and they're part of a campaign called the Yes You Can Go, and Yes You Can Go Here. And they have information, they have stickers that you can put up on your business. They're doing that. There's an organization called Equality North Carolina on the state level, MECPAC and Turnout Charlotte. There are transgender organizations. There is information out there, and I'm happy to give my information to whoever here, if you want to use me as an access point. It really is about telling our stories and meeting people who you know, are just trying to work their job and get through their day, and educating. And you know, the wonderful thing is, and I thank you for this, is people saying, I'm open to being educated. That is a wonderful thing, and I thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one or two last questions.
I've been really impressed by the dialogue and all the different channels that you've been talking about. I do want to talk to John about a little bit more about what can our industry do about the issue you raised of gentrification and how we are pushing many of our traditional riders out to the suburb, beyond the suburbs sometimes even. And how can we as an association, what do we need to be doing to think about that and how it's going to change our service models? I mean, we just had the discussion that you had about on the last panel, talking about how we have to, bringing in Uber and all these other things, and the cost of 3 riders who need to get picked up for work and having to have a reroute the entire change the whole bus route, and the cost of that. So how can we talk as an industry about the changes in downtown and how it's pushing out so many of our riders, our traditional riders, and how can we, what should we be doing here in APTA about that?
Thank you. I think that is, as I mentioned earlier, going to be the next current biggest challenge that we have as transit providers. I think the solutions are out there, and we're already engaging, and we had a great discussion in the prior seminar about the partnerships that are being explored and are active with the transportation network providers, the Ubers, the Lyfts, and taxi cab companies. The private sector, particularly under those models, the on-demand service model, I think is going to be very important in providing that answer. I think they provide the infrastructure to do that because, when you pull up an Uber app and you look at the amount of vehicles that pop up at the push of a button all throughout, no matter where you are, I think the infrastructure is there, the vehicles are there. The challenge that we have, and what I certainly have not, and we're working at CATS to figure it out, and it's through these kind of discussions with our colleagues that sooner or later someone will figure it out. And I mentioned it earlier, 10% of Americans have no banking relationship with a financial institution, don't have a checking account or a savings account. 20% of Americans don't have a credit card. And so I would wonder if you dig down into the transit-dependent population, those numbers, I would imagine, are much higher. And so even though the infrastructure is there, the Uber, I have it on my app and use it all the time because I can push a button and it links to my credit card. I have access to varied mobility options. But what about that segment of our community that doesn't have that option, has a smartphone, and smartphones aren't the hurdle. It is the banking relationships that are the hurdle. And so because our demographics are changing and our commuting patterns and our living patterns are changing, transit-dependent people are being gentrified and are being pushed further and further out to where they can find affordable housing. And it doesn't necessarily, transit agencies aren't going to be able to use the traditional models, extend the bus route into that community or rail line and provide access. We're going to have to create unique partnerships. Those partnerships are happening. Where we have not, or I have not heard, how can we potentially either become the middleman in that transaction or find a way for the private sector to answer that question. If you can't push a button and pay from a savings account or a checking account or a credit card, then you don't have access to that service. And so that is the big question I believe we have to answer very soon, or else we may find ourselves in having different conversations about, are we truly providing accessible service? I think we'll get out ahead of that and find that answer, but I think it's one that we have to find pretty quickly.
Leslie?
Sure. I just wanted to say, I think, the first step is doing just what you did, and that's raising the issue. Secretary Fox, really talks about knowing your history, that you can't kind of come into a situation and look at it statically, like just what's going on now, but you have to look how did we get where we are today. And I think your point goes to what are the intended or unintended consequences of what we're about to do, and really think about trends and the future. And to me, that's just as an important part, and I think certainly he agrees with that. These are really complicated issues, and I think you've just got to be, it doesn't mean you don't confront them because of that. It means that's the reason why they're at the forefront of the conversation. I would say that one thing, we're trying to, we embrace innovation, we want it, we're trying to stimulate it, but at the same time, you've got to be conscious of the civil rights implications. When Linda Ford, who's the civil rights director for FTA, talks about the, first mile, last mile issue, and, certainly providing access to persons with disabilities. Your point about the cost of some of these really innovative things, absolutely, that's a huge issue. How is it impacting all the communities that we're, trying to serve? And I think that some of the things that we're doing in terms of our incentives are like our Smart Cities program, which is really trying to come up with innovative, strategic ways to incorporate opportunity into, getting ahead of these issues, such as the banking issue, and kind of, how are we going to service the needs of all the communities? That's something we're very interested in, but it's got to be a part of the conversation. And we're here. We want to be at the table with you talking about this. I think it is critically important to see the impact of what we're doing 5, 10, 20 years down the road, just as importantly as it is to look back and see how it is that we got here.
Thank you. I think we'll end on that note, which I think is a great note, a charge to all of us, what we can do as an organization that focuses on transit professionals and leaders and people who are in this industry. So I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists, John Lewis, Connie Vetter, and Leslie Prohl. Thank you. So to close us out, I want to bring up our Freddie Fuller, he's the Mid-Atlantic Transit and Rail Market Leader for CH2M, as you heard earlier. He has extensive experience in transportation, but what makes Freddie most special is that he is both the first Vice President of COMTO's board and is on the APTA Executive Board. So he wears two wonderful hats. Thanks, Freddie.
Well, good morning and thank you, Myoshi. Let's give Myoshi and our panelists another hand. I have a few remarks here and some ad-libs, but most importantly, many of us belong to both APTA and COMTO, two wonderful organizations that promote and protect public transportation. As mentioned, this collaboration between the two organizations has been going on for a while now, and we'll work to continue to bring joint sessions to COMTO and APTA conferences. I want to say, Leslie, you touched on some historical perspectives today that I didn't know about. Connie, you brought reality to HB2 and really educated us. And then John touched on some of his reality with his experience in the transit industry, his growing up and riding public transportation, then learning from Eldridge, who I can't believe did all those jobs, and I know as well, and also talking about, access to mobility being a civil right. So we want to thank them again. Today's session is an example of how our organizations work together to highlight, collaborate, and address issues that affect all of us and our members. As an APTA board member, I can tell you that coming to Charlotte after HB2 was not an easy decision for the board. On the one hand, we had a situation that caused some of our members to conscientiously object to coming to North Carolina. Of course, we understand that on the other hand, we had binding contracts and John Lewis and the CATS team who put a lot of time and effort into planning to host this conference, and they are on our team. Listening to this session lets me know that we made the right choice. Each of our panelists, Leslie, Connie, and John, and our moderator, Myoshi, have done an excellent job at helping us to focus on the issue of equity. As an issue that mattered before 1964 matters today and will matter tomorrow in the provision of public transportation. And I want to leave this quote behind from Martin Luther King as we talk about HB2 and all the issues and challenges that we've had with civil rights and the impact that public transportation has. Martin Luther King once said it best, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think we have to recognize that, with this challenge in North Carolina today, we need to be proactive and fight it because, once you have an opportunity like that come into play, it could lead to bigger and more detrimental things. So we have to be mindful of what impact this could possibly have. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you in Dallas for the 45th National Conference of COMTO. That is July 8th through July 12th in Dallas, Texas. So we hope to see you there, and thank you again. Have a great day.